Veronica was driving late at night in the outskirts of Phoenix, Arizona. It was a warm evening in September. She was on a road trip and exhausted after a long day. Earlier, she had secured a motel through Expedia.com to save money. The motel was called Nighttime. All she knew was it was 2 stories in height and an outdoor motel. She had her GPS on for directions as she was driving there. Suddenly, she was a minute away. She saw the motel from a distance, and as she got closer to the location, one thing was on her mind. Why is there nothing around this motel but cactus and desert? It's so isolated. So eerie. She pulled in and parked. She got out of the car and started heading to the office in front of the main section of the motel. She got to the door, and the sign on it said, "Go to side window." She ran around the corner and saw the window. It had bars on it, but you could still see inside. She looked inside. No one was in the small room. It looked disorderly, with papers and crumbled food packaging everywhere. There was a desk with a computer that looked like it was from the Windows 95 era. She knocked on the window of the office. Suddenly, she heard, "Hey!" She was startled and frankly terrified. Who the hell was this, she thought. She quickly looked to her right. It was an older man who was dirty and had raggedy clothes with patches and holes in them, stubble with tanned leather-looking skin. He definitely looked rough. Probably homeless, she thought. He said, "Sorry to scare you. Just wanted to tell you that you don't have to keep knocking. He'll come to the window." No sooner did he speak, she turned to the window and saw the motel clerk come to the window. The clerk responded, "How may I help you? Do you have a reservation with us?" Veronica said, "Yes, it's under Veronica Phillips." The clerk looked on his ancient-looking desktop and nodded. He got the key and slid it through the small opening in the bottom of the window. The clerk said, "Room 237. Checkout is at 10 a.m. sharp." Veronica walked to her car and got her bag. As she was heading towards the staircase, she looked around at her surroundings. The motel was in bad shape. The sign itself was worn and neon removed. There was a half moon on top with a human face. It looked like a creepy version of Mac Tonight. The pool in the center of the motel had no water and had dead leaves and dirty loose clothing in it. Gross, she thought. Suddenly, she remembered that she had forgotten to get the Wi-Fi password. She was going back to the clerk's window. As she was just about there, a police officer walked up to the window and looked at the clerk. The clerk said, "May I help you?" The officer said, "We got a call of domestic disturbance." The clerk said, "Yes, room 113. The police officer walked away towards the other side of the hotel. She saw a small paper sign on the window she hadn't noticed before. It read, "No Wi-Fi." It figures, she thought, in this dump. As she was heading back to the staircase along the bottom floor, she saw a few of the rooms with broken doors ajar. She heard from one room yelling and arguing. Around the motel, shady figures just standing around, and a couple of women standing around and dressed promiscuously. She wasn't sure if they were prostitutes, but she definitely thought it was possible. This motel definitely looked like a place where trouble happened. She was regretting going through Expedia to get this room. She knew they didn't do refunds. She was very low on cash and really couldn't stay anywhere else. It's only one night. How bad could it be? She got up the rusty stairs and into her room. She shut the door, and it wouldn't fully shut. She tried again. It was still slightly ajar. She looked through the crack and saw an old man, white beard, bugged-eyed, scar across the right side of his face, and wrinkled all around. He stared right at her without blinking. She immediately slammed the door. After that, it finally shut. However, she placed a couple of the chairs and her bag in front of the door. Veronica wasn't taking any chances. It was then she finally was able to get a good look at the room. The room was filthy. Dirty curtains, stains on the floor, and even on the bed. So disgusting, she thought. She looked down on the floor and saw a couple of dead cockroaches. A bad odor came from the mini fridge. She dared not open it to see what was inside. Last time she would book a room online, she thought. She turned off all the lights and laid in bed. After all, what else was there to do? Checkout was at 10, but once she was rested, and when it was light out, she would leave. Not 1 second later. It was then that she started to hear screaming by her window. It was a man and woman arguing. The argument was mostly profanity-filled. However, without the profanity, it mostly went like this. The man said, my pills, where did you put them? I'm gonna kill you if I don't find them now. The woman said, go away, I saw you talking to that hooker. Why don't you talk to one of the dealers downstairs for more pills? This, with the profanity in it, made Veronica want to hide under the bed to feel safe. She looked at her phone and thought of calling the police. However, she was afraid someone would hear her. She looked at her signal. Absolutely no signal at all. She put her fear aside and tried to call with her cell phone. Nothing. And there was no phone in the room. Terrible motel, she thought. Not even good enough to be a no-tell motel. Suddenly, she heard an intense knocking on her door. It stopped a couple times, then continued on. She tried to ignore it. She was afraid if they knew someone was in here, they would try to rob her. From the door, she heard, this is the police. Open the door or we'll bust it down. Your safety is at risk. Veronica crawled out of bed and looked through the very thin crack of the curtains. She wanted to make sure it was the police before opening it. As she looked, she saw who it was. It was two men dressed in baggy clothing and white tank tops. One was very tall, one was short. It definitely did not look like cops to her. She crawled under the bed. The knocking continued. This is your last chance. Open up! We really are the police! He said. Blam! The door was kicked in and laying on the floor. The two men walked in the dark room. Under the bed, she could only see their worn sneakers. Everything in her was praying that they would not see her and assumed she had left to go somewhere. They were walking around. It probably was just about 15 seconds, but felt like an eternity. Her heart was wildly racing. The tall man said, I saw her check in. She must have gone off to do something. Her stuff is still here. She'll be back. Let's wait on the bed for her. We have to. They both sat on the edge of the bed. Veronica could see their shoes that were right in front of her. She tried to breathe softly so they wouldn't hear her. It was very difficult with how fast her heart was racing. This terrified her. What were they going to do to her? She was too terrified to even comprehend the potential possibilities. She was praying at that moment. In her mind, she really thought this would be the end of her life. Every minute of waiting was torture. She had to use the restroom but didn't want to wet herself because they would probably be able to smell it. The men were silent, but they started smoking. She could smell the smoke and saw the ash hit the floor. That didn't bother her too much, since the room didn't smell pleasant from the get-go. Suddenly, she saw from under the bed another figure in the doorway. She heard his voice and recognized him as the motel clerk. The clerk said, Hey, you can't be in here. Get out now. The short man said, Give it up! Hands away from your pockets! Suddenly the clerk went towards them, and a shot rang out, and the clerk fell to his knees. It was at this point that Veronica made her run from under the bed. If she didn't leave now while they were distracted, she may never be able to leave alive. However, as she attempted to, she was grabbed by the short man. Veronica started screaming very loudly. She suddenly saw two police officers in uniform come at the doorway. She screamed, Stop them! Stop them! They were waiting for me! The tall man said, Calm down. Everything is going to be okay. There's nothing to worry about. Miss, we are the police. Veronica said, What? The tall man said, Sorry, my sincerest apologies. Let me explain. We were undercover, hence our attire. We got an anonymous tip on human trafficking here moments ago by a resident here. One of those involved, we were told, was the motel clerk. He continued. So, we got in the room. He wasn't there, but had your name and room circled. We called back up immediately and had one of our officers wait by the office. However, the motel clerk never went back to the office. We were lucky we got here before he did. We were going to apprehend him, but he was about to pull out a knife. Luckily, you weren't hurt by him. Veronica sighed with relief. She was completely exhausted and emotionally worn down. She could barely stand. They escorted her out with her bag to the police car. As they pulled out to drive to the police station, she looked back at the motel. She thought, I wouldn't be caught dead here. I'm definitely giving them an awful review. After the crazy evening and questioning by the police, she headed to Goldfield Ghost Town for the next day. So glad to be away from that motel. Lesson is, if you need a place to stay, don't book it online. Check it out in person first.